So the Gemara that we've been learning concluded that the argument between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan was having to do with bringing karbanos after bringing burnt offerings for the karban re'iyah after you already brought them. And after you already brought your obligatory karban. And Rabbi Yochanan felt that it's a prohibition of Bal Tosef. You're not allowed to add another obligatory sacrifice once you already brought one. And now Reish Lakish held that that you're fulfilling maybe a mitzvah, it's unlimited, and therefore you would be allowed to bring more karban oilas re'iyas. The Gemara concluded by asking this contradiction that there's a verse in Mishlei that says Hoike raglecha mi beis reyacha, be scarce with your feet in your friend's house, which means don't hang out there too much. And that seemed to imply that that it would not be appropriate to bring too many karbanos when you're not obligated. You shouldn't be bringing, these extra karbanos. So this was a kasha on Reish Lakish that he felt karbanos is unlimited, but really, there's a verse that says maybe you shouldn't bring so many karbanos. No, so that's one way of learning this. The problem is that even Rabbi Yochanan allows going to the Beis HaMikdash even after you went once. So if that's so you really should ask this question: don't hang out too much in your friend's house. And we're referring to the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem's houses. Hashem is our friend. So it would seem that this kasha is really a question on both of them. And so it's not Rabbi Yochanan asking Reish Lakish this question. It's really the Gemara asking the question on both. And at least this is one of the commentaries mentions this, that maybe it's better not to go. You shouldn't be going so often. So the conclusion of the Gemara is that that's referring to sin offerings. And when it refers to sin offerings, it's not appropriate to hang out too much bringing sin offerings. Don't sin too much, and better don't sin. Instead of sinning and coming and hanging out, Beis HaMikdash, and maybe thinking, it's good, I get to come more often. No, better don't sin than to sin and bring sacrifices. Now, I mentioned yesterday that the concept of sacrifices are generally on mistakes. If a person made a mistake, he brings a sacrifice. So is it helpful to warn someone, don't make mistakes? Does that help? In other words, can you tell someone, not if that's what the pasuk is doing, is that really helpful? I mean, a mistake is a mistake. And so what's the pasuk? If it tells you don't sin, I could understand. It's talking about intentional sins, But if it's talking about mistakes, so then what's the pasuk really telling you? I mean, these are things that are, you bring a carbon, you weren't sure, you made a mistake. So so I mentioned yesterday that there is a concept of a person staying far away from sin, and by being extra careful, it protects him from mistakes as well. But it's also brought down that the more a person learns, it allows him to know what's wrong and what's allowed. So if a person should have learned more, then it's sort of considered wrong. So in other words, the pasuk is really telling you that you should learn more about your mitzvahs, so that you don't come to making these mistakes. So in other words, sometimes it's having that knowledge of Torah allows you to protect yourself from sin. Prepares you. You know what to watch out for. It's not like you're calling the Rav after the mistake happened. Instead, you would be protecting yourself from such a mistake happening. So that's that would be the meaning of this warning to people not to make mistakes, not to need to bring sacrifices of sins and guilt offerings. Okay. And then the Gemara says, similar to Reb Levi, because Reb Levi found there was a contradiction. One place it says, don't hang out in your friend's house too much. And the other place says, I will come to your house with burnt offerings. Sounds like it's a very good thing to come and bring burnt offerings. And the Gemara's answer is that it depends what type of offerings we're talking about. If it's a sin offering or a guilt offering, then it's better you shouldn't end up coming. But if it's a burnt offering or a peace offering, then it's something that is appreciated by Hashem. And the Gemara brought a brisa as well, that that verse that tells us to not come too often, as referring to chatas and asham, the sin offering and the guilt offering. That's what it's referring to. And because there's another verse that says that I will bring the burnt offering, I will bring burnt offerings and pay up my pledges. So oilais ushlamim amor. It says it's good to bring abundance of oilais and shlamim. But hamani mekayim, what do I do with hoikeragel from beis reyacha? That is referring to chatois and asham. Okay, so now we're going to start the Gemara, the bottom of page 7a. 7a on the bottom. The Gemara said, "Ve'ein nira chatzoin," that ve'ein niran chatzoin. You're not supposed to go to the Beis Hamikdash in parts. So some of Rabbi Yosef Lemeimar, Rabbi Yosef thought to say that what this means is man de islay asara banin loy lisku ha'idna chamisha v'lamacha chamisha. Person has 5 kids, 5 sons. So it says don't come in parts. So you might think a person has 10 sons. So it says don't come in parts would mean loy lisku ha'idna chamisha. Don't go up now 5, ulamachar chamisha, and tomorrow 5. Don't divide it in 2 and say, okay, we're going to divide up and have part will come now, and part of you, some of you will come, some of you will come tomorrow. You can't do that because the Gemara says Amar, you can't learn that way. Amar le Abaye pshita. Isn't that obvious that you can't do that? You can't have someone. You can't have people come. You can't tell half of your kids, you keep people come today. The other half will come tomorrow. Can't do that. Obviously not, because Hai minayu mishavis lahu paishim. The Hai minayu mishavis lu's reason. Which ones are you going to choose to be the lazy sinners, so to speak, the ones that are pushing it off, and which ones are going to be the ones that is reason, that are going to have alacrity and do it right away, and which ones are going to do that? How could a father tell some of them to be atsolin? Rashi says, like lazy. This is impossible. So what would it mean that you can't come in parts? The Gemara says, Ela kra lemai asa. So rather, the pasuk, what is the pasuk coming for? Now Rashi tells us that this whole you don't need Rashi really. The Gemara earlier mentioned it. That where did we get this from? That ein nirin chatzoin. Where did that come from? So ein nirin chatzoin was from a brisa that we brought. That it said mishum shenamar kol zechorcha. Since it says kol zechorcha, all your males. So we learn from there. Ein nirin chatzoin, you can't divide in part. Now, so Rashi explains it by saying that it says zechorcha, and here it says kol zechorcha. So in other words, without the word kol, we would already know that all the males have to come. So you can't just say it means that you need to bring everyone, because we know you got to bring everyone. We know that all males need to come. So the statement that the Gemara has a thought that maybe it means bring some today and some tomorrow, that is possible. At least initially when the Gemara asks it. Savar, when the Gemara says, we thought to say this. It's a thought. Maybe you could say, because they definitely all have to come. Because it says Zechorcha. But maybe you don't have to be kol Zechorcha at once. Maybe you can have some come today and some come tomorrow. So on this, Abaye says, which ones are you going to teach them to be lazy? How could you do such a thing? You're going to teach some of them, you're going to teach them to rush and do a mitzvah. The others, you're going to teach them to be lazy. So Ela Kra Lamayasa. So the Gemara says, so then what does the pasuk Kol Zechorcha refer to? It says Kol Zechorcha, all your males. So what is that going to be referring to? Like the opinion of Acherim. And Acherim generally means Reb Meir. Now, what is Acherim's opinion? The Tanya, because we learned in a brisa, Acherim said, Hamakametz, Hamatzaref Nechoshes. Makametz is someone who collects and cleans up the dog, the dog excrement, and Hamatzaref Nechoshes is someone who smelters copper. Vahabursi, and someone who works the hides. All of these have a terrible, terrible odor. Now, because they have such a bad odor, people don't like to hang out with them. And the Torah says that we're supposed to be kol zechorcha, all of your males. We have to be able to travel together, so to speak. Kol zechorcha, kol zechorcha. All of the males should be able to be together. The only thing is, these people have a terrible stench, and therefore, we would because they wouldn't be able to travel with everyone else. And it says kol zechorcha, which means everyone needs to be together. You can't be divided. So the Gemara says, "Peturim min hara'iyah." These people are exempt from the going to the Beis Hamikdash. Shenemar, as it says, "Kol zechorcha," all of your males. Mishiyachal alis and kol zechorcha, only people who come with all of your males. Yatzu elu she'ein yichalim lalis and kol zechorcha. That excludes these that can't go with all of your males, meaning they would need a division of their own because of their stench. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, doesn't it say in some other Masechta, it says something about a father who gives, who has several sons, and he gives an incentive to the one who makes it to the Beis Hamikdash first?
Okay. So that's encouraging the right thing.
Right.
That would be that would fit very well with this Gemara. That you encourage them to run to do a mitzvah. Yeah, good connection. So here we've concluded this first Mishnah in tractate Chagiga, the first Mishnah with all the Gemara on it. And now we're up to the second Mishnah of tractate Chagiga. We're on page Zion Amud Beis 7b. I should mention that the commentaries had asked a question over here about the order of the contradiction. When the Gemara asked the contradiction earlier about where it says Oilois Avei Beisecha Ba'oilois Shalom L'chanadarai, and it also said so like Reb Levi's statement. First it says and then it says the problem is Mishlei you normally don't quote before Tehillim. Tehillim should be quoted first. So the commentaries ask, why is it quoting this verse before that verse? And the understanding is that the pasuk of Tehillim is obvious. We should bring burnt offerings to Hashem. The surprising thing is the pasuk in Mishlei. That's what's surprising. Because that's surprising, the Gemara brings it first. In other words, that's what that pasuk not only surprising when it's you're connecting it to when you're comparing it to the other verse, but it's surprising in its own right. Meaning it's like questionable. What would that mean? You're not supposed to go to Hashem's house too often, and so that's why the Gemara brings that pasuk first. The conclusion is that there's a difference between burnt offerings and peace offerings versus sin offerings and guilt offerings. Okay, that's just one of the points that the commentaries touch on. And now we're up to the Mishnah again. We're in the second Mishnah of this tractate, and it's on page 7b, and it's about 8 lines from the top, 7 lines from the top. The Mishnah says as follows. The Mishnah is generally like a fresh start. So the Mishnah says, that oilois b'mayei ba'ois min hachulin. That oilois, and the way the Mishnah implies is talking about the moyed, in the moyed meaning in the holiday, not in the actual Yom Tov, only on the moyed, chol hamoyed. We're going to call it the weekday part of the holiday. So oilos and the moyed and the chol hamoyed, which is the intermediate days, those oilos, it says ba'os min hachulin, they have to come from unconsecrated property. And the understanding at this point is that maybe the ones brought on Yom Tov could be brought from Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni is the second tithe that was supposed to be brought to Jerusalem to celebrate. And one of the options with that celebration was to buy an animal and bring it as a sacrifice. Now, the Mishnah says that the oilos in the Mayed, which means in Cholamite, they come from Chulin. They have to be from Chulin. And it means unconsecrated money. The money that you have from the second tithing, that would not be allowed to be used for this. Because you're never allowed to use money you're never allowed to use that type of money to buy something that you have an obligation for. So, for example, it's like a person gives 10% of their earnings to charity. Would you be allowed to buy a lulav and esrog with that tithe? With you're taking 10% of your earnings. Can you go and buy a lulav and esrog with that money? No. You're obligated to have a lulav and to buy a lulav and esrog. You need to have your own. So you can't go and take your meiser for something that you're obligated to do. If it's something extra, then you could maybe you could do it with meiser, something different, extra. But the actual obligation you can't do. You can't use a meiser money for an obligation. So this is called meiser money. It's money that was this exclusion here that we're saying it has to be chulin and not meiser money, meaning meiser sheni, which normally you take with you to eat in Jerusalem. That would work for regular sacrifice, a peace offering, but it's not going to work for the korban oila, for the oilas re'iyah, for the burnt offering that's you're obligated to bringing from when you come to Jerusalem. The holidays, you're obligated to bring that. So therefore, because you're obligated in that is like a lulav and esrog. You can't go and buy that with money from Meiser Sheni. Now, the Mishnah continues and says, "V'hashlamim," and now it jumps to another sacrifice. This is called the Shalmei Simcha. The Shalmei Simcha is the purpose of it is that it's a peace offering for joy, and the goal is that you're supposed to rejoice on the holiday, and every day of the holiday should be joyous, and so. Would you be allowed to buy that with money from Meiser Sheni, with money from the second tithing? And so the thing is that the Mishnah says, "V'ashlamim," the shlamim mina Meiser. You could bring from Meiser. The Gemara is going to explain that this is Shalmei Simcha. This is the peace offerings of joy, and you would be allowed to use meiser money for it. Now, the Mishnah continues and says that Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach, on the first day of Pesach, you want to bring the Shalmei Chagiga. This is another peace offering called the Chagiga. And on the first day of Pesach, Beis Shammai says, Min HaChulin. It's brought from Chulin. It's brought from unconsecrated money. Beis Hillel says you could bring it also from Meiser. You could even use Meiser money to buy this Chagiga sacrifice. Now, the understanding in the Gemara is going to be that you have to mix a little unconsecrated money in it with it. So the Mishnah continues and says that Yisrael, a Yid, Yotzin Yedei Chayvasan Benadarim Unadavos Uva Meiser Behema, that a regular Israelite doesn't need really to buy new peace offerings for joy, but rather he could bring his other sacrifices that he already pledged and use that as his meat that's going to make him joyous. So, Yotzin Yedei Chayvasan, a regular Israelite, that's not a Kohen, he can't have, a regular Israelite, he does fulfill his obligation with Nedarim and Nedavos, with pledges of Neder and Nedava, two types of pledges, and he fulfills his obligation of being joyous, peace offerings of joy, by simply bringing his pledges that he pledged throughout the year, that he's going to bring a peace offering. Now, also, the Meiser Behema, he's also Yaitza, he also fulfills his obligation with Meiser Behema, with the tithing of the animals. That means that when he goes to Jerusalem for the holiday, he brings these animals with him. He's got his pledges that he's got to bring. He's got his tithe of the animals, that these animals gave birth to 20 animals this year. So now he's got to give 2. He's got to bring 2 of them with him. So that, 2 of them, because he counts this is the first, the second, the third. He puts them through a gate, and each one, the 10th one becomes holy. It becomes miser. So he's allowed to Yotzeh, fulfill his obligation of being joyous, eating meat, with these sacrifices called Meiser Behema. The Koyanim, and the Koyanim that are allowed to eat even holy meats like Kodshei Kodshim, so it doesn't mention their name before, because it's emphasizing that the Koyanim, they are even allowed to have B'chatois v'Hashamois, they can fulfill their obligation of joy with the other people's sin offering and guilt offering, and b'bechar, and in the firstborn offering. And the firstborn, that is the first child for the mother. So that that animal is brought as a sacrifice, and the Koyanim are eligible for they can they receive a portion of that for their they receive for their portion, and so they will be able to fulfill the obligation of simcha with that, and they're also able to fulfill it b'chazeh v'shaik as well. They fulfill it with the chazeh and the shaik, the chest and the thigh of the shlamim, all the peace offerings. So the kohanim get that meat. Therefore, they could rejoice with all of these meats. Now, aval, but loy ba'oifais You can't fulfill the obligation with birds and with meal offerings. These are not a way of fulfilling this obligation of simcha with those type of animals, with those type of creatures. I'm not with birds and with meal offerings. You can't fulfill it with those items, I should say. And the reason is because somehow you have more satisfaction or more satiation with meat of an animal. Rashi says over here, you can't fulfill the obligation. There's no satisfaction or satiation only with basar behema, meat of an animal. Basar behema. The Gemara Yalifla, and in the Gemara, it will prove it. So that's the explanation. That's a simple reading of Rashi, but there is another girsa that it doesn't mean you don't become satiated only with meat. It means ein simcha ela b'basar behema. That it's supposed to read there. There's a mistake. The typo is Seiva, should say simcha. There's no simcha only with the meat of an animal. So that's another way of reading this this Rashi. Okay, any questions so far? I'm trying to figure out. I have about 10 people that I don't see, and Mordechai is my faithful one. I see, but he's jumping back and forth with his screen.
Let me.
It's okay. It's fine. Oh yeah. Okay, looks better. Oh, okay. We have Yisrael. Okay, so we've got. Okay, Ezra. Nice. So we have this Mishnah, and there are another number of questions, of course, that deserve to be asked on the Mishnah. Of course, the Gemara is going to go through it. So I guess that's why no one's asking any questions. So let's start the Gemara then. So the Gemara says that the Mishnah mentioned that the Korban Oila needs to be brought from Chulin. But what's interesting is that the Mishnah mentions specifically the Korban Oila that's on the Chol HaMoyed, on the Moyed. It doesn't talk about the Korban Oila that's on the Yom Tov. It talks about the Korban Oila that's on the Moyed. So the Gemara is bothered with that. And that's definitely a question that we should have bothered us. So it says, Ela Oilais b'Moyed hu device ben achulin. So the Oilais of Chol HaMoyed is what you need to bring from unconsecrated monies. But the Oilais, which means the burnt offering for the holiday that comes on Yom Tov, that you bring on Yom Tov, that you could bring min hamaiser, that could come from consecrated money, the tithe money. Why should that be that you would be allowed to bring this sacrifice on the holiday itself with meiser money? That's an obligation. An obligation, as I explained, you can't bring an obligation you can't use meiser money for an obligation. I should give you an example. One of the big questions that people have in today's day and age is the most expensive thing that Jewish people, most expensive invoice that Jewish people get is tuition. And many people, a very common question that Rabbanim get asked is, can I use my meiser money for tuition? And what's the question? In other words, the school here is a Jewish organization, right? I should be able to give a charity. And so they told me that my child's tuition is $14,000 and I make $140,000 a year. So I'll give the $14,000 to the school. It's a Jewish organization. It's a charitable organization. And so let me pay my miser to the school, right? That's the common question that Rabbanim get asked. And the answer is that anything that you're obligated to do, you cannot use miser money for. So what the Rabbanim need to always like clarify is, what age is your child? Are they the age where chinuch, where you have a mitzvah, you have an obligation to educate them? If so, is there any of the money going towards the meals? Is any of the money going towards are you obligated in paying for their meals? Are they of age that you don't need to really pay for their meals according to halacha? So then that money that goes for their dorm and their meals, maybe you could use Meiser money for them. But the money for teaching them, you can't. Or maybe they're of age where you don't have a mitzvah anymore of teaching them, but you do have an obligation of providing for them. So there's, it gets into the legalities of what is a father obligated in supporting, to what extent is he obligated in supporting his child in according to halacha, and to what extent is he obligated in teaching his child according to halacha. And based on that, you can answer, when tuition, what monies can be used, what part of the tuition, I should say, you can use Meiser money for. But generally, you can't use Meiser money for these type of tuitions, because it's something called a davar shebechayva. It's something that you're obligated in doing. It's like buying a lulav and esrog with your Meiser money. That officially you really shouldn't buy with your Meiser money, even though it's a mitzvah. You're not supposed to use a Meiser money for mitzvahs. You're supposed to use Meiser money for charity extras. But the actual obligations, so back to our Gemara. The Gemara says, why would you be allowed to buy to bring a animal as a sacrifice? If the on Yom Tov, if it's an obligation, davar shebechayva, this is an obligation called davar shebechayva. Einoi ba ela min achulin. Anything that's an obligation can only come from chulin, from something that's unconsecrated. So tuition, if it would be 100% obligation, you can't use Meiser for. Well, because of course there's a lot of situations where it's not fully an obligation, and certain parts of the tuition is that's where you might have an exception. But here we're talking about on the holiday, you need to bring a oilas re'iyah. You need to bring this carbon oila, a burnt offering that has to be brought to the Beis Hamikdash, and this is an obligation on every yid. He's supposed to bring this carbon oila, and if you're obligated to do it, you can't bring from Meiser money. It has to be from chul. So the Gemara says, maybe you're going to say that it didn't mean for us to deduce from the Mishnah that you would be allowed to use Meiser money if you bring it on Yom Tov. That's not what it meant. Hakamash Malon, it's coming to, maybe you're going to say, if you want to say, Hakamash Malon, this is coming to let us hear the oilas b'moyed, that the oilas re'iyah, this burnt offering for the holiday, b'moyed, on the holiday, ba'ois, the oilas re'iyah b'moyed, ba'ois, oilas re'iyah b'moyed, on the intermediate days of the holiday, I should say, ba'ois, you could be brought. B'yom tov einan ba'ois, you're not allowed to bring the oilas re'iyah on the actual holiday days. Why? Because you are not necessarily obligated in bringing it this day. You could bring it any of the days of the holiday. And if you could bring it on any of the days of the holiday, then you should not be bringing it then you don't bring it on Yom Tov. What do you mean? It's an obligation on Yom Tov. Yeah, it's an obligation to bring it, but there's Tashlumin all the other days of the holiday. There's something called Tashlumin. You make it up. You could. So there's no need to bring this sacrifice on Yom Tov. Now, so if it's not an obligation that you would need to bring on Yom Tov, then don't do it. In other words, you could push it off. So maybe that's what the Mishnah is telling us. But then that Gemara says, come on, who would that go like? To Beis Shammai? Would that follow the opinion of Beis Shammai that holds that we're not allowed to bring burnt offerings on the actual day of the holiday, meaning the first day of Yom Tov, which is prohibited to do work? Would that follow Beis Shammai? Because we have a Mishnah, Beis Shammai Yoimrim, Beis Shammai says, Mavi and Shlamim, you're allowed to bring Shlamim to sacrifice. Why? Because sacrificing an animal is called Oichel Nefesh. It's for food. So for food purposes, you'd be allowed to sacrifice a peace offering. But but you can't do smicha on such a sacrifice, on peace offering, because there's a rabbinic decree against doing the leaning with all your strength on the animal, which is one of the mitzvahs called smicha, that you lean with all your strength on the animal. And the rabbis said we're not allowed to be mishtamish, we're not allowed to use a Baal Chai. We might end up cutting off a branch from the tree to hit the animal, and therefore we don't. We have a rabbinic decree, so therefore we wouldn't be doing smicha. We don't do smicha on the animals on Yom Tov. Now, what would you do? They would do the smicha, they would do this part of the service Erev Yom Tov, the day before Yom Tov, and that's how they would get around doing the smicha, and then on Yom Tov they would not be allowed to do smicha, but you could shecht it on Yom Tov. Why could you shecht it on Yom Tov? Because there's certain malacha, certain work that's allowed on Yom Tov. What is that work? Has to do with food work to make food. So the slaughtering of a peace offering would be allowed. Why? Because you're going to be eating it. But what about a burnt offering? Avalai oilais. But the oila you can't, because the oila is a burnt offering, and the rabbis understood that you could do work for yourself, for food, but not for Hashem. And therefore, you wouldn't be allowed to bring a korban oila, a burnt offering, on Yom Tov. You can bring a peace offering, you can't bring a burnt offering. And maybe this is the meaning of our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says you bring oilais on Cholamayid, but it has to be from Chulin, but it implies that maybe you can't bring them on Yom Tov. And you know why you can't bring it on Yom Tov, according to this? Because Beis Shammai says that you can't bring a burnt offering on Yom Tov because it's not oichel nefesh, it's not food, it's not for food purposes. On Yom Tov, we have similar laws to Shabbos, but there is an exception that for food purposes, we are allowed to cook. And we're allowed to do other malachas that involve the food. And so, therefore, you would be allowed to bring, according to Beis Shammai, a peace offering, but you wouldn't be allowed to bring a burnt offering. Again, how do you do smicha? So according to Beis Shammai, you're allowed to do smicha the day before. Now, what does Beis Hillel say? Beis Hillel Oimrim, and Beis Hillel says, Maviyin shlamim v'oilos. Beis Hillel says you can bring on Yom Tov shlamim and oilos. Now, why does it say and oilos? Why would you be allowed to bring oilos? And the Saimchen Aleim, and you're allowed to do smicha. Why would that be allowed? Because
Recording in progress.
let me just mute everyone. So the reason why this would be allowed is because if something is meant to be brought on this day, it's permitted. So, v'saimchen aleim, and you would do smicha on it as well on Yom Tov, because the rabbis did not make their prohibition applicable if it's going to ruin the mitzvah of smicha and on the carbon, on a carbon that you're allowed to bring on Yom Tov. Okay, so the question is, how do we reconcile our Mishnah when it talks about when the Mishnah mentions that specifically on Chol HaMoed you would bring this burnt offering for the holiday. It specifically mentions on Chol HaMoed you could do it, implying that on Yom Tov you would not be allowed to do it, and which seemingly is the opinion of Beis Shammai. And this would be very shocking because we're not supposed to follow Beis Shammai. We're supposed to follow Beis Hillel. And Beis Hillel holds that you would be allowed to bring it on Yom Tov. So why are we following Beis Shammai? Why is it seem that you can't bring this sacrifice on Yom Tov? So the Gemara continues and says, Chasure mechsura, that you know what? You're right. We should follow Beis Hillel, and therefore you are allowed to bring on Yom Tov sacrifices that are even the burnt offering. And this that the Mishnah doesn't say it is Chasure mechsura, it's missing words. V'hachi ktani, and this is what it should be, the way it should be read. It should be learned. Oilais nedarim unedavos. When you have burnt offerings, when you have pledges, two types of pledges, neder and nedava, and you became obligated to bring these throughout the year. You have oilais nedarim and nedavos. B'mayed ba'os, they can be brought on Chol HaMoed. In other words, you pledge certain animals during the year, and now you want to bring them. So on Yom Tov, on Chol HaMoed they could be brought. But Yom Tov, Einon Ba'os, they are not allowed to be brought, and this follows even Beis Hillel. Why? Because there's no obligation for them to be brought on this day. There's no mitzvah for them to be brought on this day. They'll be brought during the intermediate days. Now, v'oilas re'iyah, the mitzvah of bringing a oilas re'iyah, a burnt offering for the holiday, so that's specifically connected to the holiday, even though a person doesn't get to eat any of it, it comes afilu b'Yom Tov, even on Yom Tov, which is because it's the time to bring it, and according to Beis Hillel, that's acceptable. We mentioned Beis Shammai before that you, because you're not eating it, you wouldn't be allowed to slaughter it. But Beis Hillel says no, that even though it's food for Hashem, that's good enough. And basically, it needs to the oilas re'iyah, the burnt offering of the holiday, according to Beis Hillel, that you could bring even on Yom Tov because it's meant for this day. And when this animal is going to be brought to be sacrificed, I skipped it does need to be brought. When it's going to be brought, whether on Yom Tov or on Chol HaMoed, it needs to be brought from chulin, from unconsecrated property. So let's just stop there. So what we've basically changed around in the Mishnah is that, number one, what are you not allowed to bring on a holiday? You're not allowed to bring things that aren't necessary for the holiday, and you can bring them afterwards. So that's oilais, nedarim, and nedavos, burnt offerings, but of course they're not for the holiday. The burnt offerings that you have that you pledge throughout the year, and other nedarim and nedavos, other pledges that you have throughout the year, and that is brought on Chol Hamoed, but not on Yom Tov. Again, because it's not an obligation to bring it. It's not an obligation of the day. Now, the Oilas Re'iyah is another story. Oilas Re'iyah is the burnt offering that's for the holiday, and that is Ba'a Afilu B'Yom Tov. That comes even on Yom Tov, and when it comes, it has to. Whenever you bring it, it has to be from Chulin, from unconsecrated unconsecrated monies. It comes from Chulin. And you would not be allowed to use Meiser Sheni money for this sacrifice, Oilas Re'iyah. And then the Mishnah continues and it jumps to the Shalmei Simcha. And the Shalmei Simcha, the peace offering of joy, that the purpose of it is in order to fulfill the mitzvah v'samachta b'chagecha, boyin af min meiser, that you could bring even from meiser. You could even bring the Shalmei Simcha from Meiser Sheni. Now, the Chagigas Yom Tov, Harishon Shel Pesach, and the holiday of the first day of Pesach, when you bring the Karban Chagiga, Beishamai says, Eina ba'a ela min achulin. It can only come from unconsecrated monies. But Beis Hillel says you could even bring it min ha-meiser. You could even bring it with meiser, and we'll soon see that that means mixed with some chulin. And the Gemara now says a brisa, Tanya Namichachi. We also have a brisa that seems to flow with the same idea as we changed our Mishnah to, because the brisa says, Oilais, Nedarim, and Nedavos. It puts those three in the same category. Burnt offerings, Nedarim and Nedavos, pledges that don't need to be brought on the holiday. So, B'mayed, on the intermediate days, Ba'is, and B'yom Tov ain't on Ba'is, but they can be brought on Mayed, which means Chol Hamoed, but they can't be brought on Yom Tov. And Ba'olas Re'iyah, but the burnt offering for the holiday, Ba'afila B'yom Tov, that can come even on the holiday. Sheba, when it comes, Einei Ba Element Achulin, it can only come from Chulin, that you cannot use any meiser to buy. You have to buy it with unconsecrated money. It's a davar shebechoiva. It's something that's an obligation, and you would not be able to use meiser sheni, the second tithing money, which is meant for food. So seemingly korban shlamim would be a perfect option, but not an obligational. The oilas re'iyah, which is not for really oilas re'iyah, it's not for food, but really you would be you're allowed to bring it on Yom Tov, but you can't bring it from consecrated money. Shalmei Simcha, but Shalmei Simcha, which is the peace offering of joy, Ba'a Afmin Meiser, that could even be brought from Meiser. Chagigas Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag, and what about the Karban Chagiga for Pesach? Now, Beishamai says you bring it from Min HaChulin. It has to be specifically from Chulin. Beis Hillel and Beis Hillel says you can also bring it from Meiser Sheni money, as long as you mix. Again, we'll see more about this, but as long as you mix Meiser Sheni, mix unconsecrated money with it. Okay, so that is the basically the main point of the Gemara. The Gemara continues and says that why do we specifically pick Pesach as Ma'ishna Chagigas Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach? Why specifically did we learn about the Chagiga of the first day of Pesach? There's all of the holidays, you have to bring this Chagiga. So the same argument of Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel would seemingly apply to all the other holidays. Rav Ashi says, Hakamash Malan, the Mishnah is coming to let us hear that Chagigas Chamisha Asar, that specifically the 15th day of Nisan's the Chamisha Asar, 15, meaning the 15th day of Nisan, that Chagiga in that one needs to be brought from Chulin. Chagigas Arba Asar, but the Chagiga that is brought with the Karban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan, that it's not intrinsically obligated, so that can be brought also from Meiser Sheni. That could be brought from Meiser Sheni, because that is not intrinsically obligated. The purpose of eating it, why do you bring this Chagiga on Erev Pesach? Because you want to eat the Karban Pesach al hasoiva, which means when you're satisfied. You're supposed to eat the Karban Pesach as an extra, as a bonus, as a dessert, and therefore you need to eat something to be satisfied beforehand, and that would be the Chagigas Arba Aser, the 14th of Nisan. That one can be brought from Meiser Sheni. But the one on the 15th, that one is an argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. But even according to Beis Hillel, you need to mix with it some unconsecrated money. The one on the 14th, you don't even need to mix anything with it. It is considered kosher even from Meiser. Okay, we're going to stop here.